Obviously, I think different refugees, depending on their personal circumstances, they tend to integrate better than, some tend to integrate better than others. I guess my first question for the panelist is, in my 10 years covering immigration and refugee policies, I think it's the first time when I've heard so many, discussions or comments made by an immigration minister about the refugee system, about, the two types of immigrants, two types of refugees, the good immigrants, bad immigrants, good refugees and bad refugees. I'm just curious, what kind of impact, those kind of rhetorics, actually may have in the public discourse when we talk about refugees?
Just picking up on one note that you made, Nicholas, was the differentiation that the government has made between classes of refugees is now being challenged by the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, and it's become, I believe, a constitution challenge now. So they have, and you can go on CARL site, and I think they began that in, I'm going to say, February of this year. So they're raising serious questions about the constitutionality of the government's actions there. We cannot, it violates the Canadian Constitution to distinguish between groups of refugees, some deserving, some undeserving.
Mm-hmm. But what kind of impact do you think it may have in terms of public perception of refugees?
A negative impact. I'm not Roma. I have had the privilege of spending 2 years among various, in the Roma community, and befriending people and building some relationships and doing some field research. And the idea of undermining their experience of persecution and calling them economic migrants and more commonly bogus undermines we often talk about it, right, as academics, as lived experience. It undermines their lived experience. It undermines their personal, direct, everyday experience of not occasional acts of discrimination, but clearly persecution. So it's just more of the same, I would say.
I think it's a very, very dangerous exercise, getting involved in that sort of rhetoric. I mean, we're living in a broader kind of neoliberal environment where access to resources are dwindling. We're living in an environment where there's a lot of global unsteadiness and fiscal restraint, and the language of austerity has filtered down into different kinds of resources. So whether it's healthcare, education, other kinds of resources, this kind of myth building leads to division of communities, leads to deserving and undeserving groups, leads to divisions within groups themselves, even the groups that are trying to build communities, even though they're disparate, coming from different countries. They share the pain, they share the experiences, and they band together. So these kinds of policies can lead to further divisions. And the kind of and as a geographer, also the hierarchies of neighborhoods. I would think it builds a sifts and sorts neighborhoods also, as some schools get more resources, others don't, and other kinds of places get more healthcare facilities versus others. And so there's this kind of divide and rule. It becomes political in the end. So I think it's a very dangerous exercise. I think in an age of austerity and in an age of where resources are very, very limited, that this kind of propaganda can be very leads to completely towards a different kind of understanding of a Canadian society that we've built for so many years.
Richard?
Something that you said, Nicholas, was around the numbers of refugees being brought in through the government-assisted refugee program being reduced of late, and a lot of that is actually solely because of our closure of the Damascus office and some of the challenges that we had there, because about 35% of all the refugees that are coming into Canada come through that office. And we've made a lot of changes around having to deal with that, but it's really the conflict that's happening there has posed a real challenge. And I think that has a lot to do with why they're re-looking at how we're handling our process with UNHCR for bringing people into Canada so that we don't encounter a roadblock like that again, because what I was speaking to is just the size, the magnitude of the problem. Right now we're only resettling across the world 1% of refugees that are in camps, and so there's no doubt in my mind that that there isn't a full engagement by even I can't speak for politicians, but I know that that for us, absolutely, we wouldn't want to see a change there.
Here we try not to make it a political issue, so don't worry. But go ahead.
Well, no, that was really what I wanted to throw into that. So
I do have a follow-up question for
Sure.
you, because just from my many.
You're just waiting for me to hold the microphone.
Yes, absolutely. So many times, I encounter, I've met with the immigration minister. There has been an impression that, if a refugee is being resettled from a camp, whether it's government-sponsored or privately sponsored refugees, there are some sort of pre-screening by UNHCR. You need to get the destination. Is it actually a silver lining that, a silver bullet that, this is a better proof against any fraudulent refugees because they are being pre-screened by UNHCR and being resettled here?
Well, we're signatories with that agreement with the United Nations High Commissioner, and so really they are the ones who can make that determination. We have an admissibility step that we do, but nonetheless, that's how all of the signatories of that agreement.
But what I mean is, as opposed to someone who come in as an inland refugee and then being determined by an independent adjudicator on the IRB, like,
Right.
Is there any indication, or have you seen any research that shows, they tend to be more legitimate, really need our protection, compared to those who came, and filed an inland claim?
Well, legitimate, that's, no, I would say that the IRB is there to make sure that people who do come can be protected based on the grounds of that I mentioned in my slide around persecution that they might be facing, or the possibility of torture or other acts of violence. And I would hope that they're following that formal judicial process. And there is a review. There is the Refugee Appeal Division that also looks at that, and then there's the judicial review to try to make sure that all of those steps mean that those people are well considered. I think part of the difference is that where we might see a lot of countries or areas in the world where there's civil strife right now, particularly in the Middle East and in Asia and Africa, pardon me. On the other hand, for our claims for the inland asylum claims often are from other parts of the world and not so much representative from there. I guess the example that we were talking about for Hungary, where 98% of the asylum claims across the world from Hungary are in Canada. So there's a definite focus for that community to come here. And as we're saying, that's also our number one applicant. And I think that's part of what was driving that whole re-examination of things, because of our concern and fear for all of the people who are in situations of
Behind all the recent reforms on the refugee determination system is because of the backlog that, at the IRB, and the government wanted to expedite the processing of refugee claims. And to me, I think part of that argument is that, the longer a refugee is waiting for determination in Canada, they have set roots, their kids, attend schools, they're employed, so there's more reason for them to, humanitarian reason for them to stay in Canada on a permanent basis. So with an expedited processing under the new reforms, is it actually a good thing or is it a bad thing in terms of the settlement of these refugees? Like, so instead of setting roots in Canada, they would know that they would be booted out in 6 months. So is it a better process? So they don't have to, it's just a brief uprooting of their lives instead of having their life in limbo for 5, 6, 10 years.